Hi, my name is Carl Ingersoll. I went to the Harrington School. George Washington Larson was the principal here. And where we're sitting now was in grass. And nobody stepped on the grass. They had monitors to keep you off the grass. For, I don't know why. But then north of here was the playground. It was a dirt playground. And it was great because you could draw a ring and play marbles, and there was a little basket and a tennis court in the other corner. So I went here from probably 1938 till 1944, 1945, right around there. So that was kindergarten through 6. And the high school, up where the rec center is now, that was 7 through 12. And it was kind of different because in the school song, it used to be the high school on the hill. But when they moved it over there, it wasn't high school on the hill anymore. So I loved it here. I can remember all my teachers. One thing I remember most is about 11 o'clock every day, you could smell the soup cooking down in the basement. That's where the lunchroom was. And particularly if they had onions, you could smell the soup cooking. It cost a whole dime to eat school lunch here. And school lunch consisted of soup, homemade bread, a fruit, and a vegetable, and it was pretty good for a dime. And I particularly liked eating here because if you could hurry and eat and then play on the playground. The rest of the kids, we had a whole hour for lunch, and I just lived a block away, so most of the time I was required to go home. But well, I loved it when I'd get a dime and eat school lunch and play in the playground. The war was on. I remember in this classroom right here, we used to bring our quarters and fill a stamp book. It was you could buy a stamp for 25 cents, and your book was $18.75, and that was a war bond. And so we bought war bonds, and the day the war ended, they rang the bell here at the both at the Presbyterian Church and also here in the old City Hall. And everybody celebrated and went to the streets. But most of the time when I was here, the war was on during the 40s. I was in the 8th grade when the war was over in 1946. And so it was, that was a great experience. And a couple of times we had, one year, I can't remember, it was 45, somewhere around there, we had a lot of polio. And they closed the schools down for about, in September, so that people didn't get together for about 2 weeks. They postponed school for about 2 weeks because of the polio epidemic. Then they didn't know, you know, and I've lined up here at the Harrington School to take Sabin vaccine in a sugar cube years and years ago when they used to, you know, when they found out that they had the Sabin vaccine and then the polio vaccine. Well, it's happened a long time ago. I had Mrs. Dunyan for kindergarten and the 1st grade. She's a wonderful teacher and helped me learn how to read. I had Miss Parker in the 2nd grade. I had Mrs. Edwards in the 3rd grade. Mrs. Clark in the 4th grade. Then in the 5th grade we changed classes, and I had a fellow named Rulon Brimhall. He was our music teacher. He taught also some history, Mr. Woolston taught here, Mrs. Miller. I had Mrs. Miller. She taught geography and world and U.S. history, and just loved it here. But I'll never forget George Washington Larson was our principal. Good old George. The first day I came to school, my mother dropped me off over on the west side. And at that time you had to bring a bottle of milk, a little pint of milk, and graham crackers, because you had a break. And I came in the afternoon, and my mother dropped me off there about noon. And I got to the door, and my milk bottle, she'd taken wax paper and put elastic around it so it wouldn't leak, but it had to be up. But mine had fallen down, and when it got there, the sack was wet and the bottle fell out. And if you notice, there's a corrugation in the cement there, and my bottle hit the cement and broke. Milk, and the big second and third graders said, "Oh, you're in trouble now." That was my first experience on the first day of school. And I went in and I didn't have any graham crackers or milk for our break. But we used to go into the little room down here on the north side. It was like a dance hall, and that's where they set up the tables for lunch. And they'd put on a record, and you'd learn how to dance and waltz and so forth. That was just some of the things I remember. I remember Christmas programs and parents coming, and I had a part on the Christmas program, and when I was a fifth grader, I just loved it here. If I had to do over again, I think I'd try to be a better student, because later on I went to high school and junior high. I wanted to be an athlete, and I wasn't. I was really immature and little. I was the littlest kid in the class almost. And so I got disheartened about study, and somebody told me, "Someday you'll be a teacher at the high school." I'd have studied a lot harder. Maybe that's the reason I liked teaching so much, is because I was such a terrible student. I love teaching. I miss it today. I should never have retired now. I feel like I'm on the shelf, but it was seemed like so long ago, and now of course they've turned it into the rec center. It's kind of interesting to go up there every day. I walk and swim, or try to swim and walk every day, and that's where I used to go to high school, 7 through 12. And it was a great old school. They tore it down, and when they built the new school, it had been built a year, but when I went there as a teacher, Mr. Overly was the principal and hired me. Arlo Shelley was the assistant principal, and I took his place teaching biology. I majored in zoology, minored in botany, and with an emphasis on entomology, and I taught a year at Bingham High School up in Copperton before I got the chance to come here. And it was really special to me because Mr. Overly hired me and wanted me to teach, and he was the coach that cut me from the basketball team every year that I tried out. So that was particularly pleasing to me, to have him want me to come and be a teacher here. Later on, when I became the head basketball coach, they said, "Well, you finally made the team." I taught and coached basketball here from 1972 to 1979, and I had an opportunity to be an assistant coach at BYU. So I went to BYU for 9 years, 81 to 80 to 89, and I was an assistant coach at BYU. During some good years, we had a lot of great players, and went to the NCAA tournament, I think 4 times, and NIT once. It was a great experience at BYU for me. I came back to teach at American Fork. Later on, became an assistant principal there, and then finished out and retired. And I think it was 2000, around 2000. Then I went on an LDS mission to teach biology at Brigham Young University, Hawaii, and be an assistant basketball coach there. And that was special, to teach college course. My father, David Grant Ingersoll, and my mother, LaBelle Anderson Ingersoll, went to school here at the Harrington. They also went to school at American Fork High School and graduated from American Fork High School. All of my 7 children graduated from American Fork High School. And then my one young son is on the faculty at American Fork and has won 2 baseball state championships at American Fork High School. His name is Jared Ingersoll. My mother and father were always interested in education, and my father, he was a teacher at American Fork High School, and then got involved with the Democratic Party, and when Herb Ma was put in as the governor, he appointed him the postmaster. Now the post office was just south of here on Main Street where the bank is, and so he was the postmaster, and every day he'd come walking up, and as I got out from school, and he would walk me home, and we'd have lunch together. My mother would have lunch for us. And those days, you had a whole hour for lunch. And so I remember him, and he's a big old guy, 6'6", and we would walk home together, and it was kind of sweet. Then he went back to teaching school when I went in the service, and then ended up being principal at Pleasant Grove High School. So our whole family has been in education. My mother, who had a degree, taught at the Developmental Center. It was the training school at the time. She was principal of the education department there at the Developmental Center for a while before she passed away. So, and we only lived 2 blocks away. And my great-grandfather, Adams, settled American Fork. I live on their old property, which was the original settlement here in American Fork. He and 3 or 4 others came to American Fork a long time ago. And he built a grist mill on the creek that's just north of here, up by the mortuary. The grist mill was the first grist mill in Utah County, and that's ancient American Fork history. So this has always been family and a place to grow up, and the old Harrington School is so unique and beautiful, and I'm so glad we're going to do something to enhance it and memories for forever here at Harrington School. And the Apollo Hall. When I was on the planning commission, we tried to get the city to purchase these, and Heber Thompson, I don't know whether you remember Heber Thompson, he passed away, and he became the mayor, and he and I said, oh, this has so much potential. And so I'm so happy to see something happen here, because it's a special old place I just walked through, and memories are the pages of my heart. It's so beautiful.